Howdy my totally tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another video, and today we're talking racing games. Well, we're not talking just any racing games today. We are talking about racing games developed by Criterion Games. Now, for the unfamiliar, Criterion Games is a British game developer based in Guildford. They were founded in 1996 and are still going strong today. And really, Criterion's known for two things: creating the renderware engine that would be very popular in the early to mid 2000s with plenty of games from the era using it, and their racing games. As much fun as it would be to rank every renderware game, we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be talking about Criterion's racing games. Their most notable titles are the Burnout series. They started the Burnout series and developed a majority of the games. They've also worked on the Need for Speed series, but they've created some other racing games some people aren't too familiar with. And today, I thought I'd sit down and I'd talk about all of Criterion's racing games, from their entire back catalog to Need for Speed Unbound. I love racing games, I love the Burnout franchise dearly, and I love just about every Need for Speed game. I've actually ranked all the Need for Speed games on the channel as well. And so while I might have already talked about those games, and my opinions haven't exactly changed in the last year, so reuse, recycle, there are some racing games I actually have not talked about yet on here. Now, just to be crystal clear, we're talking about only racing games developed by Criterion Games, not every game they've developed. So I'll give a shout out to Black, a great shooter. I'll give a shout out to Scorched Planet, and I'll even give a shout out to Airblade. All of those are good games, but they're not racing games. Maybe one day I'll rank all of Criterion's games. If you people really want to see it, you know what, you can let me know down below. But today, it's just the racing games. And who knows, there might even be some hidden gems. So yeah, we're going to be looking at them all worst to best, stacking them all up against each other, seeing how they compare, what's the best, what's the worst, which one has the best racing mechanics, the most broken AI, etc, etc. Let me know down below how all of you feel, or maybe some fun memories, just something. I'm always reading the comments. As always, like, share, comment, sub. We got the Patreon and super thanks going on. Anything is super appreciated here. Let's just get right into it. This is my opinion. It's not the definitive list, even though I'd like to believe so, but it's not definitive. It's just my opinion. What do I think is the worst out of all the racing games developed by Criterion Games? What's at the bottom of the barrel? And so here we have Speedboat Attack, releasing for the PC in '97. This game, it's a bit different from Criterion's other racing games. It's speedboat racing. Yes, it's the rare boat racing game like Hydro Thunder, and this was actually Criterion's first racing game, and I'll just say it absolutely shows. But this game certainly isn't no Hydro Thunder replacement. Its core gameplay isn't actually all that different from Hydro Thunder. You race around on a boat through 10 different courses, and you gotta pass through checkpoints to receive time extensions and avoid running out of time. And the higher the difficulty, the less time you have to get through these courses. And of course, there's other boats racing you at the same time that are trying to halt you. There's 5 whole boat types here, each one differing with respect to acceleration, speed, handling, and armor. And something kind of cool, you can actually switch between 2 different views. There's first and third person. The cockpit view in first person, it's not actually that bad. I think it's decent here. There's really 2 main modes to this game. There's racing, where you go through the 10 courses like I said, and you try to beat the clock. But there's also combat, where it's more action oriented and more like a vehicular combat game, where there's actually hazards and ammunition pickups for machine guns, rocket launchers, and general power-ups. You can even get repaired at the repair dock. There's also a time trial mode, but yeah, that just kind of exists. I gotta say, throwing in the vehicular combat mode is a nice little twist that keeps it different from Hydro Thunder. The game even went online back in the day. I don't know how many people were playing back then, let alone 25 years later, but yeah, it did go online. Now, while this game does have some differences from Hydro Thunder, and it tries to have a bit of its own personality, I wouldn't say this game's particularly great. The controls are okay, nothing special. It's serviceable. I played with the keyboard, so maybe that's why I didn't think it was great, but it seemed fine enough. It's just the actual racing itself isn't too exciting. None of these courses stood out to me or were interesting or engaging. I thought the racing was generally just kind of dull. The game did put up a decent challenge, especially on the harder difficulties, but I just didn't find it all that fun, and it just felt a little generic. And the combat mode, you know, it exists, it's different, it's unique, but I just didn't really find it all that exciting either. I just didn't have a ton of fun with this. Like, I was just like, it's alright, and that's just kind of my sentiment with this game. Like, it's alright, it's not a bad game, and it looks pretty decent for the time, but I wouldn't exactly say that this is some hidden classic. And really, there's a reason you, like, never hear anybody talk about this game, and it's just basically forgotten. It's never been re-released either, so the only way to play it these days is either the original CD or some kind of download. So you really do have to go out of your way if you wanted to play this, and I just don't think it's worth doing that. But the game exists and it's not terrible. And here we have the latest Burnout title, sadly, Burnout Crash, releasing for PS3, 360, and iPhone in 2011. Now, Burnout Crash is pretty different from all the other Burnout games. I don't know if I'd even call this a racing game, but it would feel weird to not include it, especially with all the other Burnout games on the list. Really, it's the Crash mode from the Burnout games, only it's its own game, to mild success. If you've played the Crash modes in the games, you'll understand this immediately. It's actually played from a bird's eye perspective, but it's still the same. You drive into an intersection with your car and try to cause as much havoc as possible. There's a number of intersections in this game, and you can drive a couple different vehicles, but really, all you're doing is you're driving into that intersection and trying to cause as much destruction as possible, whether you're smashing into other cars, whether you're blowing up, whether you're destroying other stuff. I mean, you're really just trying to cause as much destruction as possible. And you know, I won't lie, it's fun to drive into traffic and just get completely destroyed and mauled by the other cars and blow up. It's fun. I mean, the Crash mode and all the other Burnout games were really fun too. There's no bad Crash mode, this game included. So why is this game where it is on the list? Well, when you compare all of these games, yeah, this game's a bit shallow. I mean, the Crash mode is fantastic in Burnout, but the Crash mode has never been the main course. It's usually been like a side dish here, you know, like some mashed potatoes or mac and cheese. No, here it's the main course. This is the whole game, and you know, it's fun for a little bit, but eventually it does kind of get old, especially when there's only like 5 or 6 intersections in this game, and doing them over and over and over, it does get old. On top of that, you will have seen all the intersections in like an hour or two, and then you'll be totally done with the game within, I don't know, 3-4 hours, maybe 5 at most. If you're taking your time, you want to get some high scores on the leaderboard. Yeah, there's just not a lot of depth here. Now, I still think a Burnout game that is just Crash mode is still viable. I think it just needs to be done a bit better than this. It needs to have the depth that the main games have and not from a bird's eye perspective, and just have a lot more to it. It's a shame this is the last Burnout game. While I wouldn't say it's a bad game, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I'd say just go to any of the other Burnout games and play those Crash modes, because there's a lot more depth, there's a lot more to them, and they're just better times. And so here we have the original Burnout, developed by Criterion and put out by Acclaim in 2001 and 2002. Now, the original Burnout, most people have never played this game, and you know, after buying it and sitting down and playing this game before this video, yeah, they're not really missing much. I think the best thing I can say about this game is you can really see how far the series has come when you play the original game. This original game feels like an incredibly budget title. Like, it just feels really budget, like $20 it released in the early 2000s budget. But despite that, I think you can still have a pretty decent time with it, and it's a fun little arcade racer experience. It's definitely the most arcade feeling Burnout game of them all, with a very strict timer, the way the cars control, which is alright, and the way that the game generally looks. Again, it is budget, so it doesn't look amazing, but it just gives off those arcade vibes. Like I said, the handling and general drifting in the game is pretty decent. It is very arcade, and it's different from the other Burnout games. If you come to this game after playing like Burnout 3 or anything on, it's going to feel very weird. The game is a lot less about the racing, actually, and the game is a lot more about just dodging the traffic, especially because at most you'll only ever have 3 opponents. And speaking of those opponents, the rubber banding in this game is absolutely atrocious. One of the worst examples I've ever seen. They will always, and I mean always, catch up to you. It doesn't matter how fast or slow you're going, they will always be near you. Now, the whole series is full of terrible rubber banding, but this game really is the worst. Another annoying point to this game is how cars crash off everything in this game. You get wrecked incredibly easy. It can really be frustrating how easy you get wrecked. Like, again, if you've played any Burnout game after this game and you come back to this, it will be very jarring with how easily your car just gets completely destroyed. You actually have to alter your playstyle and sometimes even have to drive either really defensively or just slower so you don't crash a bunch of times and run out of time and lose the race, which did happen to me. And you're not going to be getting really any help from the boosting either, because boosting sucks in this game. You need to fill up the meter completely, and to fill that up you need to get near misses. To get near misses, you have to be stupid close to the car, like way more than any other game. The window for success is tiny here. It's actually hard to fill up the boost, and of course if you crash you lose almost all of it, so good luck to you there. Now, there isn't a ton of courses in this game. I think they're decently enough designed, but there just really isn't a lot here. You'll end up playing the same ones over and over, a certain section from one over and over, and it does honestly get a bit repetitive. Hey, at least the music's actually pretty decent. It gives off those arcade vibes I was talking about earlier. Now, Burnout 1 is okay at best. It's really not a great racing game. Coming back is kind of difficult, and trust me, if you've played any other Burnout game, you're not going to really like this very much. It just feels way too limited, and The formula has just been improved so many times over that I really can't recommend you try this. It's a good, interesting footnote, and it's cool to see where the series started, but it's just not worth it to come back to it. And here we have Suzuki All-Star Extreme Racing, also known as Redline Racer, releasing in 2000. Now this game, if you couldn't tell from the name and what's on screen, it's a motorcycle racer with Suzuki bikes. There's no story or setup or premise here. You really are just going racing. You start every race from the last position and you just want to win. When you start the game, there's 3 tracks and 3 bikes to choose from, but as you play through, you can unlock more, with eventually there being 10 tracks and 8 bikes to drive with. Now, when it comes to the racing in this game, it's actually pretty decent. It very much is an arcade racer, and you know, it's not the most common to see motorcycle racing games, especially nowadays, at least outside of the Ride series, so it's always nice to see a motorcycle racer, and I think the game controls more than fine enough. You know, everything feels nice, you can take some really tight turns, and I think the physics are pretty decent here. The game also has a pretty decent sense of speed. This game not only has a good sense of speed, but it also actually looks pretty good, especially for the Dreamcast. It has a solid, smooth frame rate, has decent music. It actually is a nice presentation. Unfortunately, similar to Speedboat Attack, I just don't think the courses, the tracks, whatever you want to call them, are all that exciting in this game. They're just kind of dull, they're a little generic, and it just doesn't do anything you haven't seen before, especially for the time. And it's been done much better in plenty of other racing games. Like, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say any of the tracks are bad in this game, but I wouldn't say any of them are really good either. I couldn't tell you, like, any of the tracks off the top of my head. I just don't really remember. They just kind of went in one ear and out the other. I just thought they were really average to generic. However, despite everything, I would say the game is still a little underrated. I don't think I've heard, like, anybody ever talk about it outside of a Metal Jesus video talking about hidden racing game gems, and I don't know if I'd say it's a hidden gem, but, you know, if you've got a Dreamcast, if you like racing games from this era, or you need a motorcycle racer, I think this is a pretty decent one to check out. It won't blow your mind, and there's plenty of better racing games on the Dreamcast, but hey, this is the best motorcycle racing game on the Dreamcast. It's got that going for it. And so here we have Burnout Legends, released for the PSP in 2005 by Criterion. It was ported to the DS though a little bit later by Visual Impact. I'll be talking exclusively about the PSP version here, as I've heard pretty terrible things about the DS port. So Burnout Legends really is Burnout on the go. Not only is it on the go, it's basically a remix of Burnout 2 and 3. It takes everything from those 2 games and just kind of slams them together. All the cars, all the courses, all the game modes from both games, they're all here. And you know, it is impressive how uncompromised this experience is. You really still are getting a Burnout experience. Obviously, it doesn't look as good and it doesn't feel as fast, but the action is still absolutely there. You still race just as many cars. The tracks are not compromised. You race the full track. Like I said, all the game modes are here. There's a ton of vehicles in this game. All the cars are here. All of the crash mode from Burnout 3, it's all here. And again, it really is impressive how uncompromised this version is. Unfortunately, it doesn't add anything new. It's just Burnout 2 and 3 here, basically. But if you were looking to play Burnout in the 2000s on the go, this was a great alternative. Nowadays, Burnout Paradise is on the Switch, and I'd much rather recommend that than this. And so here we have Trickstyle, releasing for the Dreamcast and PC in '99. Now, Trickstyle is very different from all of Criterion's racing games. It's a futuristic hoverboard racing game, where it really does take place in the far future, and it sees the player taking part in stunt-filled hoverboard races through various cities like London, Tokyo, and Manhattan. Now, before making this video, I really didn't have any experience with Trickstyle. I knew about Airblade, the spiritual successor, which is a lot more like Tony Hawk, but Trickstyle, no, not much. But I can tell you now, this game is actually a hidden gem, and this game is a banger. Not only is the premise and world of this game super unique and interesting, but the gameplay actually, it holds up. It's actually a really solid racing game that's very different from almost any other racing game I've played. I think the closest I could compare it to is like a snowboarding game, specifically like SSX, where you're still racing, but you can do tons of tricks along the way, and that's really the gameplay. Or you know what's a better comparison? Sonic Riders. Sonic Riders is like almost the same when it comes to just how the game is set up. You know, hoverboards, going through cities, doing tricks, boosting. Yeah, Sonic Riders is a better comparison, but I'm sure most people are probably not familiar with Sonic Riders, so I guess SSX is the reductive comparison we're making here. This game, though, still is very much an arcade racer, complete with a timer and really just that sense of speed that arcade racers have. You aren't going to get to grips with the controls immediately. It takes a hot minute to get used to these controls. Like, it does feel a little awkward, but sooner than later, if you just stick with it, you'll be pulling off tricks left and right. I won't lie, it does have a little bit of a difficulty curve. Sometimes the AI will just wipe the floor with you, and if you don't master the controls and the trick system, you're really not going to get anywhere. So it does take a little bit of time, but eventually, you'll overcome the challenges if you really just stick with it. But the initial impressions might not be the best, especially if you're getting your ass handed to you by the AI. Outside of the races, there's actually some challenges you can do, doing tricks or going through some gates, and you can unlock a bunch of new stuff. There's actually 18 different courses here and a number of different characters. And you know what, when it comes to the course design, the track design, I think it's actually pretty decent to good here. It's memorable, it's different, it's unique, and it actually stuck with me. Maybe that's because I played through some of these so many times because I lost so many times in a row, but I think the course design, it's actually pretty alright. And you know what's more than alright? The presentation of this game. Not only is it a good looking Dreamcast game with a rock solid frame rate, but the music actually slaps in this game. I actually really do enjoy the music here, and it was one of the reasons I kept on going through. Look, trick style, I think this game is actually super underrated, and I'm sad that most people have never even heard of it. The game doesn't have any sort of modern re-release outside of a Steam release. And I think it's just begging to be re-released on consoles. I think there is an audience for a game like this. Again, it is very unique. I mean, the closest thing really is Sonic Riders, which low-key just kind of copies this game looking back. But I had a ton of fun with this game, and it really does sadden me that nobody's going to talk about this game. Nobody has talked about this game, so here's me. I'm championing this game. It's a good game. It's worth playing, especially if you're able to play it. If you like Sonic Riders, if you like SSX, if you like arcade racers, I think it's worth playing. I really do think it is worth playing. It'll take a minute to get used to it, but once you do, once everything clicks, it's such a good time with its unique aesthetic and presentation and character and charm. Like, it's got that 90s energy that we really need to see more of. I really did enjoy my time with this one. Alright, and so here we got Burnout 2 Point of Impact, developed by Criterion and put out by Acclaim in 2002 and 3. After this, the series would be put out by EA. Now, Burnout 2 is actually a pretty decent improvement on that original game. They really looked at that original game's formula and tried to improve it in just about every single way they could, and it feels a lot more in line with later Burnout games. The game is still absolutely a budget racing game, though. From its visuals to its music and just general feel, it still is a budget arcade racer. And don't get it twisted, I don't think it's bad at all. I think it actually adds some charm to this game and gives it a little bit of a personality that the other games don't even have. Not even the first game, because this game is way better than the first game. It is much faster and generally controls a lot better. The handling on the cars is way better. They don't crash from the slightest bump anymore, and it is a lot more forgiving with the time limit. The AI is nowhere near as aggressive and rubber bandy as that original game. They're not going to somehow catch you when you're 10 seconds ahead of them. The boost is way better in this game. Getting near misses isn't stupidly difficult. You can go into the air also to get boost. The game, again, just feels a lot faster. It's a lot more fun. The tracks are a lot better designed. There's more of them. There's a lot more cars here. And this game really does have an aggressive personality. For instance, there's music that plays in the game. It still is pretty budget music, nothing special. It's not licensed like the later games, and it's fine enough. But when you start boosting in this game, the music gets really loud, it gets really fast, it gets, again, very aggressive. They really do want you to drive like a madman. And they knew what they were going for here, because the more you drive like a madman, the faster you'll end up going. There's a very Need for Speed hot pursuit mode where you actually are a cop and you have to wreck an escaping criminal's car to arrest him, and you actually unlock other cars through this way. And then this was the game that introduced Crash mode, where you have to just cause as much destruction as possible. You'll drive into an intersection and just try to total as many cars as possible. It's very, very basic here, especially compared to later games, but the foundation was laid here for a very aggressive series. And all of this comes together to make Burnout 2 a very fun, good racing game. I think it's a great arcade racer for the time. I think it is actually still worth playing even nowadays. You can come back to this game if you played the later games and still have a good time. It's not going to start out as crazy as the other games, but it does eventually get there. And I think once it ramps up, it is a really fun time that is worth playing. Here we have Need for Speed Rivals. Now, this game was developed primarily by Ghost Games, but Criterion did have a helping hand, so I thought I'd include it here. Someone will say I'm missing it. So yeah, Need for Speed Rivals released in 2013. I can't believe it's been 10 years. I remember getting it day one and being pretty middling about it. Now, Rivals was kind of a mix between the new Hot Pursuit and new Most Wanted. I say new as if they're not like 10 to 12 years old, but newer Most Wanted and Hot Pursuit. The story has you playing as either a racer or a cop, and the story's pretty basic. You just want to be the best and you want to outrun the police, and the cops want to get them. It's pretty simple. There's not really much to it. Now, Rivals was the first Need for Speed for the PS4 and Xbox One era, and they were really hyping up the game's presentation, like the dynamic weather system and all of the different texture, all that good stuff. And the game does look pretty good. It's a shame that it runs at 30 FPS, even on PC, which I remember being a big bummer. And Ghost Games claims that the reason the game was at 30 FPS was because of the All-Drive feature. Now, All-Drive was a system used to seamlessly matchmake players within the same open world. Basically, it was the always online shit, where you'd have to always be online and random players would be joining your game and driving around, or they'd put AI to drive around if there was nobody. And it sounds like a good idea on paper, but this isn't paper, this is gameplay, and I've always disliked this. I remember back in 2013, I remember constantly I'd be moved to different games due to people leaving because of peer-to-peer crap, or just players just smashing into me because we just happened to be driving in the same area, or the AI getting in the way like in Need for Speed 2015. I've never liked the all-drive thing. I think it's, again, a good idea on paper, but I don't think it works well in game. But when it comes to the driving and the handling and all that, I think it is pretty decent here. I don't think it's as good as Hot Pursuit 2010 or Most Wanted 2012, but I think it's pretty decent here. The cars feel nice and there's a decent selection here. The customization is actually pretty alright too, having some fun throwbacks to like Underground. When it comes to playing through the game, you can choose between the cop or the racer, each with their own missions. When you're the racer, usually, you're racing each other, you're racing other cars, you're trying to get away from the police, the typical stuff. And when you're a cop, it's much more like Hot Pursuit 2010, where it's all about taking out the racers and really just going after them. This game even has like weapons where the cops have EMPs and can pull down spike strips, but the racers even have stuff like jammers and stun mines and turbo, and this is an interesting dynamic. I don't think it's really expanded on all that much, and it feels about as basic as you would think it would feel in a game like this, but it's a nice little dynamic, I think. And then you just progress through a bunch of missions, you unlock new objectives and missions as you continue, and there's really not all that much to it besides that. The open world is based clearly off of California, and I like that, but I'll be real, this open world isn't too exciting, it doesn't have all that much going on, and the game's general flow and pacing are decent enough. It's certainly better than like Need for Speed 2015, but it's not amazing. And speaking of not amazing, we have the soundtrack, which I always thought was just kind of obnoxious. I didn't like it then, I don't really like it now. I would say Rivals has definitely become one of the more forgotten Need for Speed games over the years, and I think it's pretty decent still. I think it is actually worth trying to some extent. I'm not going to say it's amazing. I don't like the auto drive. You can't pause the game because of it, and it doesn't do anything you haven't really seen before, but it brings everything together in a decent enough way, and the game still has some fun. You could certainly do a lot worse when it comes to Need for Speed, and the game is dirt cheap also, so keep that in mind. And so here we have the latest game by Criterion, and the latest in the Need for Speed series, Need for Speed Unbound, releasing in 2022. Now I gotta say, pre-release, this game did not look very good. It was very strange. They announced it like 2 months before it came out, which is never a good sign, and they didn't show a ton of it before it came out either, but I gotta say, Unbound is actually pretty good. They really took everything that worked from Heat and just continue to build on it. Is it like way better than Heat? No, I don't think it's way better than Heat, and there's a couple things I think Heat actually does better, but I still actually really did enjoy my time with Need for Speed Unbound. I think the first thing we'll bring up that everybody notices immediately is the flashy art style and presentation. Heat looked really good, this game graphically looks really good, but what it has is, it has a bunch of weird cel-shaded and graffiti art clashing with the realistic type. For instance, all your characters look very like almost anime, and when you're drifting or boosting, it adds all these cool visual effects. I really like this. This is really unique. This series has never had anything like this. It gives it some personality, some charm, and I hope it stays, actually. I think it's very different, and I quite like it. When it comes to the story, it's nothing too complex. You play as your custom created character, and you hang out with your friend Yaz, and the two of you work at this auto shop known as Rydell's Rides. And one day Yaz has enough of it, some shit goes down, couple years pass, and you just want to be the best racer. There's this big event in the city where you're going to do these giant granular races, and who's the best, who's in your way? Of course it's Yaz. So, two former friends going at it, nothing too crazy. I think the story's pretty alright in this game. I think the dialogue is pretty middling for the most part. Sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it is a little, hey fellow kids, how do you do? Like when they're talking about Reddit or Instagram or anything like that, I'm just like, ugh, please stop. But for the most part, I'd say the story was fine, the characters were fine, and the writing for the most part was fine. I've heard some people call this like woke Need for Speed, which I think is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, yeah, the game does have a little bit of social commentary, but it's not to the point where I'd say it's woke or anything like that. The dialogue was fine enough, but I could definitely see some people being annoyed with how much dialogue there was. I wish, low-key, there was a way to turn it off. But all that can be ignored. How does the game play? The game plays very similarly to Heat. It feels very similar, and I think when it comes to the game's handling, its feel, and sense of speed, it's very good. I would say it's the best it's been in quite some time. Not that the other games were even close to bad. This just feels really nice, and I think that it does have a very good sense of speed. I think the visual effects help add to that sense of speed. And I would say from a feel and handling perspective, it's pretty nice. I really do like the drifting. I think the double tapping of the right trigger just really works. I know, again, some people don't like it, but I really do. Now, when it comes to the open world that is very clearly Chicago, I'm actually a bit mixed on it. I don't think it's all that exciting. It feels a bit generic for the most part, and it just doesn't really do anything crazy. I think Heat actually had a better open world. I think Heat had a better soundtrack too. This game's music, I'll just say it's not for me. I know a lot of it has to do with like rap, since A$AP Rocky is one of the main selling points, but it just wasn't for me, and I'll leave it at that. But when it comes to progression and playing through this game, it's nothing too crazy and nothing you haven't seen before. There's a day and night part of each day, and your heat carries over throughout the day. As your heat goes up, the police get more and more aggressive. If you get taken out by the police, you lose all the money you've earned in that run. You have to go back to your garage to basically save all the money. When it comes to the events, there's races, there's drifting events, there's an event type where you have to smash a bunch of stuff, there's an event type where you got to get away from the police, or a small little time trial, and that's really all there is when it comes to the events. It's nothing that you haven't seen before outside of smashing stuff. I really wish this game had maybe one or two more event types to it, just because these other ones can get a bit old, especially since you do a lot of them in the same location and you'll be going on the same track numerous times, which seems a bit silly since it's an open world. But still, I thought the racing was pretty solid. I think this game has actually got a really good challenge to it. The first couple hours of this game not only feel a bit slow, but they're actually pretty difficult. You'll find yourself not winning these races, like not coming in first, because you just don't have a car strong enough to win these races. The car you start with is pretty ass, and you got to upgrade it quite a lot to make it pretty decent and get that number up. But trust me, stick with it even a little bit and you'll get a lot faster, you'll know the map a lot better, and you'll start winning some races, start winning those bets, getting a ton of money, and then before you know it, you'll have a couple cars and you'll be able to race in the Grand, the giant race that everybody wants to compete in. There's a couple weeks in game, so there's so many days, and the game actually has a pretty good length to it. They give you more than enough chances to get enough money for the big races or a good enough car. That was never an issue for me, and I really did like the whole progression cycle of trying to upgrade your car and make it super raw, and upgrading the garage and just getting all the good car parts. I think the customization of this game is pretty solid. You can make some pretty cool looking cars, you can download some wraps like the other games. But all in all, I did enjoy my time with it. Do I think that the game goes on a little too long? A little bit, but I also might have done more races than necessary, so I'll just chalk it up to that. I had about 20-25 hours before I was done with this game, and I don't really see that there's a ton of replayability outside of that. There's some online races you can do, but I'm alright, and I am so glad they got rid of that stupid all-drive crap, like, thank goodness. I think Unbound is definitely another step in the right direction from Heat. There are some things I like more about Heat, but I think Unbound is the better game overall, and I actually do recommend it, especially if you haven't played Need for Speed in forever. The game is priced at $70 US at release, which I think is quite a bit for this. It's very steep. I would say wait for it to be at least half off, but if you like racing games, if you haven't played Need for Speed in quite some time and you want to try it again, yes, try this one. And here we have Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012. This was Criterion's second stab at Need for Speed after their first game went so well, and this game really, they tried to take the Burnout Paradise formula to Need for Speed. Now, I very much remember when this game did come out, and I remember playing it a few hours, but I never beat it back then. It was only a few years ago that I really had a newfound appreciation for it, and I actually really did enjoy my time with it. You know, I love Burnout Paradise, so I was very inclined to like this game, and I know it's a hot take to really enjoy Burnout Paradise this much, and to even enjoy Most Wanted 2012. A lot of people, plenty of people have let me know that they do not like this game, but I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite Need for Speed games. The game's story is pretty non-existent. In fact, there really just is no story. The game does have a most wanted list similar to the blacklist of the original. and you just want to be the best racer. That's really all there is to it. The game legit just drops you into the open world and says go at it, and I actually really like this approach. It's very different. While I do, love the original Most Wanted story and cheesiness and all of that, I think this is fine enough too. They let you get right into the action. They drop you into this open world, say go find a car. They obviously give you a car, but you can go find cars throughout the world, and then you just get to the events. There isn't a shit ton of events like Burnout Paradise. It's not every intersection, but the game does have a ton of different events to it, and there's a bunch of cars to drive in. This game is very unique with how it approaches cars. You literally can just drive around in the open world, and if you find one of the cars just lying around, then you can just get in it and that's your new car, and then you can of course choose from these different cars. I've heard some people don't like the progression in this game because you can just go find the best cars like immediately, and yeah, that is true. You can go find some of the best cars immediately from the start of the game, but I think it's really unique. And I don't think that it messed with my progression at all. I wasn't using the very best cars immediately. I didn't know where they were. I didn't look it up. I just was going to use whatever car I found, and I think that's the best way to go about it. When it comes to the handling and the drifting and the feel and all of that, it is not as arcadey as, say, Burnout or even Hot Pursuit 2010. It's a little bit more realistic, but I still think it is very arcade, and I still think the controls are very good. I think the general selection of the cars is pretty solid, especially for the time, and then when it comes to customization and upgrading the car, I actually thought it was pretty decent here. It wasn't, Underground or the original Most Wanted, but I think it was more than enough. When it comes to your events, it's your typical affair. You got your sprint races, your circuit races, your speed races where you got to keep a high average speed. There's an event where you'll get ambushed by the police and you got to avoid their pursuit. The police in this game are not as serious as Hot Pursuit or the original Most Wanted. They're pretty tame by comparison, and they're pretty easy to get away from. So it is a shame that the police aren't as aggressive as they were in Most Wanted. These races, the sprint races, are actually different from Burnout Paradise as well, as they do have checkpoints, so you can't just find your own route like Paradise, which is a little lame by comparison, but I mean, I get it. It allows them to have a tighter designed open world, and the open world in this game is fine enough. It's a bit generic, I won't lie, and it's not as memorable as the original Most Wanteds, but again, it's fine enough, and it's certainly better than some of the games that came out after this. The game has the same collectibles even as Paradise, with the destructible fences for the shortcuts and the billboards, so it really does feel like Burnout Paradise 2 to an extent. Obviously, it's nowhere near as aggressive. You're not going to be taking cars out anywhere near as much, and it's not as crazy, and the car damage doesn't get anywhere near as high, but you still go really fast. It's still a really fun time. It's still got that arcade racer, hard grip feel. And I can say without a doubt in my mind, it's one of the better open world racing games from this generation. It's one of the better open world Need for Speed games. It's, it's not Most Wanted 2005. It's just not. It's not Burnout Paradise either. Both those games are better than this game. But I still think this game is very good. I know this game has been unfairly criticized and compared to Most Wanted 2005 because they share the same title. Yeah, they do share the same title, and that game is better. I still think though this game has a ton of good parts to it, and I would still say it's one of my favorite Need for Speed games, and I have absolutely no problem recommending it. This game had a pretty kick-ass online back in the day too. I remember it actually had like some form of crossplay, which was like kind of crazy to even think about then, but it did. Nowadays, I'm pretty sure it doesn't go online. But Most Wanted 2012, I had an absolute blast playing it again. And I'm going to just throw it out there, special shout out to the soundtrack. The soundtrack is great in this game. I really did enjoy it. Of course, there's no heavy metal, but it's still pretty good. I did think that it was a very good soundtrack, and I think this is a good game. It's totally worth trying nowadays. It's pretty cheap. It's available on Steam now even, so go try it there. And here we have Need for Speed Hot Pursuit releasing in 2010. This is when Criterion decided to take on the Need for Speed name, and man, they really showed up with the big guns. This game was a reimagining, a reboot of Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit for the PS1 only for, modern audiences, and they did more than just reboot it. They created one of the greatest Need for Speed games, one of the best arcade racers ever made. I feel like this game really just got like everything right that a Need for Speed game should, and it was when Criterion Games was really like at the top of their game. They just had Burnout Paradise before this, and this game, while obviously very linear and not as open as Paradise, is still a fantastic time. This game really did go back to Need for Speed's roots with no story, and it's all about the exotic cars and the high-speed police chases. You go on these pretty long linear tracks just trying to go as fast as possible and get away from the police. In this game, you can either be a racer or a police driver, and there are full career modes for both roles. When you're a racer, you get much faster cars and it's all about racing and getting away from the police. When you're a cop, it's all about the power. You have a much stronger car, it's not as fast, but you can take out the racers, and that's really what you're doing. And each side has power-ups, like an EMP or the spike strips, and this is a decent improvement on the original game. It definitely adds some more variety and almost car combat-like aspects. Now, when it comes to the tracks, it's definitely a return to form. It's not some big open world. All these tracks aren't connected to each other. They kind of are. Some of them are connected, but they're not all connected to each other. Really what it is a bunch of individually designed tracks, and you race on them, and they're actually all pretty good. A lot of them are just straightaways, yes, but there's more to it than that. But does all of this really matter if the handling and the physics and the drifting and the driving aren't good? No, it doesn't. It's a good thing this game has great handling and drifting and driving. This game is very arcade. It feels pretty similar to Burnout. It's not as crazy as Burnout, but it's still very fun. It's still very fast arcade. You can turn really quickly. You can brake really quickly. It doesn't really try to be anything near realistic. It's about as crazy as Need for Speed has ever gotten outside of Need for Speed 2. And the car selection is very good in this game. There's a lot of exotic and crazy looking cars that you and I could never even come close to affording. There is no vehicle customization, which I know has bugged plenty of people, but again, they were trying to make it like the old game. It really doesn't bother me that much. I don't need that much vehicle customization to be happy, especially when the cars are this cool. And interestingly enough, there's a bunch of unlicensed cars here. There's a bunch of fictional cars, which is not the usual for Need for Speed, but there's plenty of real cars here as well. The damage modeling is actually pretty decent for these as well, much more than later Need for Speed games. And this game, I got really nothing else to say other than it's a blast. When you're playing as the cop and you're trying to take out the racers, it's exhilarating, it's fun, and when you're trying to just get away from the police, it is so fast. You will be going crazy fast. There's shortcuts. Knowing the track is really important, getting away from the police, and it was clear they focused on what the title implies, the hot pursuits, and that's the best part of the game. The hot pursuits are the best part of the game, and they're arguably some of the best cop chases in the entire series. The chases really are exhilarating. It can even get white knuckle sometimes, and the action just is so good in this game. This really is just such a fun time. I really can't sell it enough because it just is that good. It really captures that Burnout magic and brings it into Need for Speed, and I can see why Criterion was the chosen developer for Need for Speed, because this is great. And sometimes it just goes to show that more is not always better. We don't need some giant open world and a story and a ton of car customization to have a fun time. Sometimes it really is as simple as just a bunch of cool tracks, a bunch of cool cars, and the police going after you, and some really good handling. When it comes to sense of speed, I think this game really is unparalleled compared to the other Need for Speed games. There's plenty of really fast Need for Speed games, don't get me wrong. You can go pretty fast and the sense of speed is good, but this game, it just hits different, man. It's so good. This game is also very widely available as it was remastered a couple years ago. It's even on the Switch, so if you really haven't tried this game yet and you like arcade racers, I don't know what you're waiting for. Just go try it. It's one of the best Need for Speed games, and I've never not had a great time with this one. Alright, we're just in goated territory now at this point. I know some people aren't going to agree with me here, but I have Burnout 3, developed by Criterion and put out by EA in 2004. Now, Burnout 3 really just turned the whole series on its head, and racing games in general on its head. Remember that really aggressive attitude I was talking about with Burnout 2? Well, imagine that times 3 or 4 for Burnout 3 Takedown. This game has one of the most aggressive attitudes you'll ever find in a game. This game is off the walls crazy. This game would really set the standard for the Burnout series. This is one of the most fast-paced arcade racing games to ever release. The game does bring back a lot of the elements from Burnout 2, only really just accentuates them. Like Boost, for instance. Boost was in Burnout 2, you could get some decent speed with it and the music would ramp up. No, this game just is absolutely crazy with its boost. You go way faster with the boost, you're getting way more boost. You get boost through risky driving, and you rapidly are increasing a car's speed as fast as you can. The new mechanic that Burnout 3 brings to the table is in the title. Takedowns. It's all about taking down your opponents, smashing into them as hard as you can, smashing them up against walls, rear-ending them like crazy. You want to take these other drivers out or you're not going to win the race. You get boost for taking them out, your boost meter extends when you take people out, and you're just going really fast in this game. This game is just an absolute white-knuckle experience. They really just crank Burnout 2's gameplay up to 11 or 12 here to make it just an insane experience. This game has one of the best senses of speed you will ever find in a video game. And then there's the actual progression of the game. So instead of before where it's just kind of a list of events, you actually go around the world in this game. It's like a world tour, and you get medals, rankings, and a ton of unlockables. This game has a ton of variety. You aren't just racing the whole time in this game. There's a bunch of other game modes. One of the better modes here is Road Rage, where you gotta get as many takedowns as possible. It's as simple as that. Take out as many opponents as you can. It's very fun. There's other game modes here like Burning Lap, where it's kind of like a time trial and you just got to get through the course as fast as possible. There's Face Off, where it's 1v1, and there's Eliminator, where it's a 5-lap race and last place gets eliminated every lap. Not the most innovative, but still very fun here. But then the best mode in this game that isn't racing has got to be Crash mode. They took the Crash mode from Burnout 2 and really just amplified it up like crazy. You are just destroying as much as possible. It honestly feels a bit like a puzzle game now, as you really got to angle where the car is going to go. You got to figure out the best spot to crash so you destroy as much as possible. And the Crash mode in this game is just super fun. And with all this together, this game has an absolute ass ton of content. There's over 170 events in this game with a ton of variety. There's a ton of different courses. Sure, you'll go through the same ones a number of times, but this game still has a ton of courses. There are dozens of vehicles, and a lot of them control differently. This game just has a lot going for it, much more so than most racing games released nowadays. And then this game's presentation is just absolutely fantastic. This is one of those rare instances where EA actually taking over a series is for the better. That budget feel completely gone. The game looks and plays amazing. The frame rate's fantastic, and then the soundtrack is just legendary. It is perfect for this kind of game. It is just absolutely amazing. This game is one of my favorite racing games of all time. It's one of the best arcade racers ever. It's one of the best racing games of the 2000s. It's just one of the best games like of all time, and it's number 3 on this list. Why is that? Well, I just like the other two a little bit more, but this game is 110% worth playing. It is a fantastic time. And so here we have Burnout Paradise, developed by Criterion and put out by EA in 2008 originally. Burnout Paradise took the Burnout formula from 3 and Revenge and just put it into an open world of all things. Now I know this game doesn't get the same love that Burnout 3 and Revenge get, but this was the first Burnout game I played. I played it pretty much when it came out on PC, and I remember just being absolutely hooked. I was amazed by this game. I was really just blown away, and I have much more time in Paradise than any of the other Burnout games. And so maybe it's just my fun memories that get it up here, but it was really hard to not pick Burnout Paradise as the best Burnout game. I just really do love this game to death. It takes place in the fictional city of Paradise City, a fully explorable open world and where players can compete in several types of races or events. Every single intersection in this game is an event, which I think is just an amazing way to spread all the events out. It's not like a list, you got to go to the intersection. I really like that. This game has a ton of personality to it. There's collectibles, there's literally hundreds of shortcuts. There's dozens upon dozens of vehicles to unlock and race in, and then this was the first Burnout for me where I got really invested in the online mode. Now Burnout 3 and Revenge do have online modes, well they did, but Burnout Paradise was the first one where I actually played it a bunch, got really into it, and have had just so much fun with the online. Whether it's exploring around the open world or competing in races, the online mode was really something to behold in this game. Oh yeah, and then the actual gameplay, if you couldn't tell, is very similar to Burnout 3 and Revenge. It's still incredibly fast paced. You go like stupidly fast in this game. You drift around corners with insane speed. There's still the takedowns. You still have the really awesome boosts. You can do burnouts again. And almost all the game modes from the previous couple games return. Sadly, Crash mode is not in this game. They instead of this new mode called Showtime, which you can activate literally at any time you want in the game, but there's not really anything to do with it. Like there's no game modes based around it, and you can do it in a race, but it's not really going to do much, so that is a disappointment. But at least it's not totally gone like Dominator, but the core gameplay is so great that you won't miss it that much. The damage system is also different from other Burnout games. In every other Burnout game, if you crash, you crash. You gotta respawn. But here, if you crash, but it's not the worst crash, you can actually get a drive away where you do drive away and you're okay and you don't have to respawn, which is a very nice touch, and it shows we've come really a long way from that original game. Now, despite being an open world, the attention to detail is still absolutely there, and the general level design is just as good as the other Burnout games. There is so much to this open world. In lots of racing games with open worlds, you still really do go on a track, and usually there's big arrows like Need for Speed Underground telling you where to go. In Burnout Paradise, you can get to the finish line pretty much any way you want. If you think you know a faster route than what the game recommends, you can take it, and it might be faster, it might not, but it's up to you to find out. There's tons of shortcuts, there's gas stations all over so that you can fill your boost. Like, this open world is living, breathing, has a ton going on, and it doesn't feel anywhere near as lifeless as some other open worlds. Saints Row. And it really has become one of my favorite open world maps like ever. I still do know it like the back of my hand. I really just love it, and I think if most open worlds were made half as decent as this one even nowadays, the Loch Ness Monster would have got my 350. But you know, it's just a great time, and I think nothing was compromised with the general gameplay of Burnout by making it open world. I really do think it enhances the experience. I know, again, some people don't love it as much as 3 and Takedown, and that's fine. I just really got addicted to this game, especially when I first started playing. I just could not put it down. This soundtrack, major banger. It slaps. It definitely gets laid. I love the soundtrack to this game, whether it's the main theme of Paradise City or any of the other music. It's just amazing. It is superb. Everything comes together to create one of my favorite experiences I've ever had with a video game. Genuinely, it is just so good. I was there from almost day one, and I remember playing this game the last day that the servers for the original version were online. Nowadays, it's been remastered, and it's on even the Switch, so you can play it portably. I guess that gets it some bonus points. It is the only one that is available on modern consoles. And if you claim to like driving or racing games and you haven't played Burnout Paradise, especially now that it's on modern consoles, all I really got to say to you is, poser, what are you doing? Go play it, man. Absolutely, go play it. It's totally worth it. And here we have, in my opinion, one of the greatest games of all time, Burnout Revenge, developed by Criterion and put out by EA in 2005 and 6. Burnout Revenge really looked at Burnout 3 and said, how do we make it even crazier? We already had the crazy at 11. What do we even do? And what they did, they put Burnout 3 on crack. It probably wasn't just crack either. Maybe it was heroin or shrooms or meth, or you know what? It was every drug they could find to put Burnout 3 on, and then we got Burnout Revenge. It's like Burnout 3, but even crazier. The core gameplay isn't all that different. It's incredibly fast. It's faster than even Burnout 3, with everything you know and love. The boosting, the takedowns, the shortcuts, the airtime, the near misses. It's all there, but now they've expanded the combat options. What do I mean by this? Traffic checks. Burnout Revenge really focuses on racing during rush hour traffic. Now, in earlier Burnout titles, if you rear-end somebody who's going the same direction as you, usually you'll push the car out of the way, you'll slow down a bit, and then you'll keep going. Unless it's the original game, then you'll just crash. But not Burnout Revenge. They really encourage you to just rear-end people as hard as you can. If you hit somebody going a different direction as you, you will crash. But slamming into people going the same direction, rear-ending people, the traffic check as they call it, oh, it's so great in this game. You will send them flying. And not only will you send them flying, you basically turn them into a projectile. You can hit other traffic, causing even more chaos, or you can use it to hit opponents. You can slam pedestrian cars into your opponents that you're racing to take them down as well. This adds a whole nother layer to the game. It makes the racing even more frantic, even more fun. It makes it more like, honestly, a car combat game without the weapons. Instead, you're just using yourself as the weapon and slamming into other cars. It really makes for an enjoyable experience. I love this edition. It is in Burnout Paradise, but it's really not a focus of the game, and it's nowhere near as great as it is here. Here, it just is fantastic, and I think it really adds to the driving. The racing was already just amazing, like to begin with. The traffic check really just adds to it. And then we have the rest of the game. In terms of progression and playing through the game, it is very similar to Burnout 3. You do just tons upon tons of events and get your rankings and your medals. And unlike Burnout 3, it's not like a world event kind of thing. It's separated by license class. But you really are just going from event to event trying to get the best score possible or come in first. Whether you're racing, whether it's a burning lap, whether it's one of the new challenges based around the traffic check. I think all of these challenges are great. This game is just... it's just so much fun. There really is no bad game mode here, but you know the best mode that isn't racing. It's gotta be the Crash mode. Now, Crash mode was great in Takedown, but in Burnout Revenge, the Crash mode is just phenomenal. It is my favorite Crash mode of the whole series. I have nothing but amazing things to say about it. There are a ton of scenarios. There's a ton of interesting scenarios. A lot of them are just straight up puzzles you have to figure out, and there is wind when you go off jumps, and I know some people don't like this, but I don't really care. I think it honestly adds a bit more to it. It makes it more engaging, and some last minute changes can be made, and sometimes the wind is good. It'll make a quick little adjustment and it'll make even more destruction, but you really just do cause so much chaos and destruction in Revenge, and I just think it's unparalleled. I think the Crash mode is fantastic. It really does feel like a puzzle game at times, and I think it's just unrivaled by anything before or since. It's just a superb time, and I think that anybody who hasn't tried the Crash mode alone should try the Crash mode. I mean, it's pretty obvious that I recommend Burnout Revenge. I mean, this is just a fantastic video game. It is just amazing top to bottom. I love all the tracks. I love the racing. I love the handling. I love the cars. I love the Crash mode, the game modes. This game is just amazing. I know I'm really sucking the game off at this point, but I just really, really love this game. I couldn't put it down the moment I started playing it. It's not perfect, of course. The AI is still about as rubber bandy as you'd expect from a Burnout game, especially in the one-on-one settings where they magically catch up to you, but this is one of the rare instances where I don't think it's that bad, especially in Burnout in general, because it makes the races a lot more exciting and you can just take them out again, but they will not mess around here. I think it was a little better than Burnout 3's at least. I also do really like the progression of this game. I think it is a little better than Burnout 3's, and I love the variety that's presented here. And then when it comes to the presentation, it's just top notch. The game looks amazing, it plays amazing, the frame rate's great, it's super smooth. Like, I have nothing to complain about the presentation. The soundtrack is just great. The soundtrack in 3 was amazing. This, it's probably about as good. It might be a little less, but it's still just fantastic. It sets the stage, and I'm really just gushing about this game. I need to stop talking about this game. You know, some people just have those games they can talk about forever. This is one of those games for me. Burnout Revenge is just a fantastic game. It absolutely should be played by anyone who likes driving games. Burnout 3, Revenge, and Paradise, I think, are just must-plays for anyone. Even if you don't like driving games, they're just must-plays. It's crazy that here we are in 2023, we're like almost 15 years removed from the last Burnout game, and we're still talking about just how good it was. Like Burnout Revenge, Burnout Paradise, Burnout 3, really the Burnout series, they're all that good, but it's more than just Burnout. Criterion Games, you know, they're one of the best developers ever when it comes to driving games. When it comes to arcade racers, like, I think they're maybe the best developer. But that's it for today's video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I was talking about Criterion and all of their games. You know, it's always great to revisit these games. Some of my favorite games of all time. Easily some of my favorite driving games of all time. Let me know down below. If you made it to this part of the video, you know, comment Hamtaro is in that old anime series. That's our secret code phrase that you did make it to the end of the video. So I very much appreciate it. And yeah, just let me know how you're feeling.